And this is just a polite but firm reminder to lean into the microphone when you're speaking, just for the purposes of the room and the online audience. Thank you.
Is this on? Okay.
Yes.
What if we don't want anybody to hear us?
You're out of luck. Sorry.
Okay. Well, David has resigned, as y'all know. He and Susan are moving to Costa Rica, so they're in the process of that. So we have 2 vacancies. Is that right? And Sally and Wade are alternates, so they would succeed to those vacancies until we get filled, and we'll figure out what to do with that. So any names that people can come up with and get them submitted for us to consider, that'd be great. So we have some members of the public here. I don't think there are a whole lot. I see one on the screen, and I know Ann Hayner and her son are here. Would y'all like to introduce yourselves?
Ann Hayner, 319 Assembly Drive, by the way. Really happy to be here and really appreciate having a number of family who've worked with Bill and others in the last few months. And it's been quite an education. Never knew how much, was actually relevant in terms of zoning, and my eyes have been opened. Really, really interesting.
Thank you. We continue to learn.
I'm Brendan Hayner Slattery, also 319 Assembly Drive. Really glad to finally be here in person and see things.
Great. Thank you. And someone is Zooming. Who is that?
Okay, I can hear myself now. Mary Roderick with Land of Sky Regional Council, and myself and Tim Ormond are here to talk with you about our steep slope stormwater project.
Okay. Thank you.
I can't turn on my video. I guess that's disabled by the host.
One moment. We'll.
All right, and I'm not as concerned about my video, but Tim will need to share his screen for our
Do you
presentation.
have any video?
One moment, Alex. I'll check on that.
Okay. Alex is
Okay.
working on that. So,
Yep.
right. We neither want you to hear nor see us, apparently. Okay, well, while we do that, let's do some of the business parts before we get the past business. First, is there a motion to adopt the agenda? So moved. Is there a second? Second. I don't think that's debatable. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Thank you. I do think, let's have a moment of silence. Forgot that. Amen. Thank you. The minutes of the April meeting were circulated. They were read, and some revisions were suggested by Dan Dean. Those were forwarded to Angie or Scott, and those were incorporated into some revised minutes that were circulated, and I assume everybody received those. And then this morning, Mason, who worked all last night, had some more revisions, which probably what we ought to do. I think they're all okay. They're more grammatical than anything else. If y'all are comfortable with that, we could approve them. Those who have read them, I've skimmed them. And then we could turn them over to Angie or Scott. Is it Angie or Scott doing the minutes? Angie is. So if y'all are comfortable with that, they mainly are grammatical. They are grammatical and not substantive. Any objection to that? Hearing none, then we'll take that as approval of the minutes as further revised, subject to their getting put in correctly with in the minutes by Angie.
Would you like a motion?
Sure, that'd be great.
I would move that we approve the minutes as revised and sent out by Mason, which, as you said, clarified in several points, and move for approval of those revised, latest revised minutes.
Is there a second? Second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Thank you. Alan, I'm having a hard time seeing you down there. Speak up. I will. Okay, thanks. Okay, moving on to our business. We have, first of all, a discussion of the stormwater issues, and I think that's why Mary is with us. And Scott, you want to lead us into that with Mary?
Sure. So Mary Roderick with Land of Sky Regional Council, my coworker. I'm also with Land of Sky Regional Council and the town of Montreat as the zoning administrator. Is working with Blue Earth Engineering. I believe that is Marshall Taylor and Tim Orman that are on staff there, and they have been looking at developing, I believe the working title is the Montreat Steep Slope Stormwater Plan. And it's essentially looking at what's possibly what I would categorize as a district stormwater approach. So basically looking for opportunities either within right-of-way or larger contiguous areas for stormwater capture and treatment. Basically is an alternative or a parallel option to individual properties capturing and treating stormwater. And with that, Mary and or Tim, I'll let you guys lead in with that, and please correct me if I've mischaracterized any of that.
Sure, Scott. Just checking as well if Tim has the ability to share his screen.
Not yet. That's
Okay.
disabled.
All right, Alex, I think you'll need to make Tim co-host in order for that to occur. Okay, great. All right. Tim, do you want to go ahead and do that and bring up our slides? And I have to ask, are y'all in the new town hall?
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay, it looks like it's new and shiny. It looks really nice. I look forward to being there in person soon. Okay, so yeah, as I think Scott did a good job of characterizing the the goal of our study. We'll go into a lot more detail for you, but I am Mary Roderick and this is Tim Ormond, and we are here to talk about the project that we've been working on. Tim, you'll blend in that outline. So first I'll talk briefly about the purpose and goals of the project and some of the outcomes and inputs like the inventory and the resident survey. And then Tim will take over and talk more about the stream assessment they did and the larger watershed assessment and follow up with residents. And then we'll discuss our findings and potential next steps. And this is really still a preliminary discussion. We would like your input to help finalize our recommendations before we wrap up our final report for DEQ as well as for the board who will be presenting to in person in June. So go ahead, Tim, to the next slide. So, and I hope this is legible for y'all. I'm looking at the text right now and thinking it might be small, but we had several drivers really for this project. One of them is your stormwater permit requirements, a stormwater system. And I guess I should back up a little bit because there are a few people in the audience who are not familiar. We funded this project with grant funding through DEQ through a program called 205J. And I mentioned that here in the stormwater permit requirements section. But yeah, I write these grants every year and we've done several stormwater inventories. That's one of the things that is a deliverable from this project for other communities. And your stormwater permit requires that you have an inventory of your stormwater system. And Montreat's audit is in 2022. So we're, kind of keeping that in mind and working towards making sure that y'all pass that with flying colors. The state has become much more enforcement oriented since Mike had left DEQ. And I think that's also because EPA is being more enforcement oriented. So, we want to make sure we've got kind of all the things in place. So the stormwater system inventory is one of those things. And as I said, we have done several of those. We've done one for Black Mountain and several other communities throughout the region because, having a good picture of what you have, what your infrastructure is, can help you manage it better. Another part of this is watershed planning. The Swannanoa River itself is on what they call the 303D list. That is, the bad list for water if it doesn't meet certain water quality criteria. This list goes to the EPA and there are, supposed to be steps taken to remove it from this list. Swannanoa River is impaired for benthos, which means the little critters in the water. And that can come from that can be for a variety of reasons. Temperature is one of them, which occurs from hot water, storm water flowing into your streams. We are a cold water stream environment, and that heat from the pavement is an issue, thermal pollution, as well as chemical pollution and sediment. So that's kind of a big driver as well for improving stormwater management, is just improving overall water quality and helping remove the Swannanoa River from the 303D list. Flat Creek itself is not impaired, but it is a tributary to the Swannanoa. And we funded the watershed plan back in 2014 that covers Montreat, but there were no projects proposed in the project, and it didn't look at any steep slope issues. So that was another concern of mine, that we needed to add that dimension. Finally, infrastructure protection. Tropical Storm Alberto caused significant infrastructure damage, estimated about $900,000 for the town of Montreat. And heavy rainfall events are becoming more frequent and intense. This graphic on the right shows the Southeast as an average has seen a 27% increase in heavy precipitation. And that is the top 1% of rainfall events. I don't want to get too detailed, but there's a definition for what heavy is. And there has been a 27% increase in it in the Southeast from 1958 to 2012. That was the last statistic where they kind of combined that those years and looked at it. Looks like it's much worse in the Northeast, though. 71%. That's crazy. So we're seeing more heavy rainfall. We're seeing more frequent rainfall. Hopefully, we're not going to see events of the level of Tropical Storm Alberto because infrastructure typically just isn't designed to handle that. Even if we had really great stormwater management on every single property in Montreat, there may well be, a level of damage that would come from a storm that size. But that was kind of the thinking behind the project. We were not aware of, and I don't know that those conversations were underway at the time, that the Planning and Zoning Commission was also thinking about and looking at their stormwater regulations. That's kind of a separate and parallel process that, have kind of merged over the course of this last fall and into this year. Next slide. Tim, I said I wasn't going to say any of this stuff, and now I'm talking about all of it. Sorry. But I feel like revisiting it probably is good, especially for folks in the room that have not heard this before. So quickly, one of the project outcomes that we've already completed is the stormwater system inventory. This is an online, interactive, web-based, GIS-based inventory. You can click on every one of these inlets and outfalls and see a picture of them. If you're in the website, and this just shows basically where everything is. And there's something else that's not shown on this particular layer. It's called the permitted outfalls. Those are the things that DEQ is going to be looking for when they come and do your audit. And we have a separate layer of that information. It's just not in this map. So that's completed. Next slide. Okay, within the context of this project, I don't count it really so much as an outcome, but we did do a resident survey to talk to people. So we know where the system is. We've looked at it. Your Public Works Department has been on the ground with my colleague John to try to identify any issues. But of course, your residents know best, along with Public Works, about where they're seeing problems. So we did do a survey back in the fall. I think we had 16 responses, so not a ton of response, but people were seeing erosion. By far, that's the second bar on the top graphic. Erosion was kind of the biggest concern. Some nuisance flooding, and people, were less concerned with water quality impacts or damage and failing infrastructure. And a lot of people said they are already managing stormwater on their property, which we do know there's a stormwater ordinance, and I don't remember when that went into effect and how many homes would be affected. We didn't ask that. It may be people doing it voluntarily with rain barrels and rain gardens, et cetera. That was about a 50-50 split, not quite, and some people just weren't sure. Tim's going to talk more about their follow-up with the issues that were identified. That was kind of a free comment section in the survey, and they did go through those and then follow up on those issues. Next slide.
Okay.
So I think Tim will talk more about this, but another component was also just looking at water quality and kind of the physical condition of the creeks and tributaries. So we did both. Josh Holbrook a professor at Montreat. We provided funding to him for water data loggers and to do some macrobiotic assessments. But Tim's going to cover both their own assessment, the stream assessment that they did, as well as Josh's results. And he is working on his final report. That'll kind of all come together in June into one. All right, take it away, Tim.
All right. Thank you, Mary. Good morning, everyone. And I'm going to go into the technical analysis of what Blue Earth primarily did with Land of Sky. And I hope I got the right balance of detail without getting too much into the weeds, but giving you sort of information of what we conducted and what kind of data is now available throughout Montreat. As Mary mentioned, for the stream assessment, part of the reason the stream assessment is important in the stormwater plan is when you can observe the health of a stream, you can sometimes make some predictions of where stormwater problems exist. So where you might have flows that are excessive and causing erosion. So we started the project by doing 62 different stream and stormwater system observations over 4,200 linear feet of Flat Creek and tributaries. And the overall conclusion was there's very little bank instability along Flat Creek and the tributaries, which is really good news. The condition overall is very good. And as Mary mentioned, Professor Josh Holbrook also did some freshwater habitat assessments, and each site was rated good to excellent. So very good water quality and habitat. In follow-up to the resident survey, we did a field investigation. On the left, it's not legible, but it's basically a summary of all of the resident surveys, all of the data that was provided. And we went to each individual site. And the conclusion for this is virtually every problem was a localized problem, whether it was erosion or some need for maintenance. And one of the things from talking with residents and getting feedback was the need to identify potential storage in the public right-of-way for a watershed-based approach. And the reason for that is to really look at the stormwater in Montreat holistically, so that we're not just looking at disconnected pieces. We want to see how everything interconnects. So for the watershed assessment, and if anyone has questions, we can hold them to the end or however you prefer. For the watershed assessment, I'm going to give you an overview of the watershed, the terrain analysis we conducted, the hydrologic and hydraulic modeling using SWIM, and what we call the potential storage evaluation, basically where you could put stormwater storage, and then our field observations and findings. So this is the Flat Creek watershed, approximately to the town limits, and it's about 4.8 square miles. So after delineating the watershed, we used the high resolution digital elevation models that were conducted for the entire state as part of the North Carolina floodplain mapping program. And this is just the visual. You can kind of see the Flat Creek boundary in yellow superimposed on the digital elevation model. From there, we did a watershed delineation using GIS type tools that analyze the DEM. And for the Flat Creek watershed, we ended up with 158 different subwatersheds with the average area of about 20 acres. And that's basically based on topography, where outfalls and streams connect. And then to characterize the watersheds, it's important to know the soil conditions. So we use soils data from USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service soil survey, and that informs the hydrology. And this is a particular grouping of the soils, what we call hydrologic soil groups. and it's also an NRCS research-based designation. There are 4 groupings of hydrologic soil groups, from type A, which has the highest infiltration, to D, which is the lowest. And just so you can see what the Flat Creek watershed looks like, the light green is type A and the dark green is type B. So these are the 2 soils that actually have the highest infiltration rates. Type C is yellow. There are just a few places there. And then they characterize urban areas as disturbed soil, and it's treated differently. So all of the soils data goes into building this watershed model, and it probably looks like chaos, but if you zoom in, there's a lot of important data. The blue circles are what we call junctions, they're model nodes, and then the red arrows are conduits or flow paths, which could be creeks or pipes. So we used a model called SWIM, PC SWIM, and it was originally developed by EPA, and it's been improved over time with different interfaces. It does the detailed hydrology, which is what kind of runoff happens during different rainfall events, and then also the hydraulics, which is the flows through pipes and streams. And our model included 129 different conduits representing the stream reaches. And just to zoom in, this will give you an idea. This is along Assembly Drive, and you can see sort of a close-up of these conduits and junctions that comprise the model. And the dark green boundaries are subwatersheds. Again, this is based on the digital elevation model. And then we had to define the creek geometry. So we have all of the creeks defined with the digital elevation model. You can see a cross section in the upper right. And you can see the flow from a particular storm. And just to show you an example of model results, this is at junction 507. That basically we run storms and we have a hydrograph, which is flow over time. So it will tell you a lot of pretty detailed information of what to expect for different storm events. You basically can get your flow along any creek for a range of storm events. We focused on the 1.5 inch storm for this analysis because that's common for a water quality event, basically a frequent storm event that you would design green infrastructure for. And then just wanted to point out that the model is integrated with all of these GIS layers. So we have the hydraulic model, the storm sewer inventory, the complaints, all of these other GIS layers, including the right-of-way. And this informed us for the storage evaluation. So zooming back out, what we did is use the digital elevation model and our model results to identify potential storage areas. And the first go around that we did, we looked for any area that had a depth greater than 1/2 foot and a surface area of greater than 25 square feet. Well, that resulted in 587 storage areas, which was not really practical to evaluate, at least conducting field investigations. So we did another analysis at a higher tolerance. In this case, the minimum depth was 3 feet in an area greater than 100 square feet. And you can see these in kind of the cyan with a yellow boundary. And I'll show a close-up in a second here. So this shows a close-up, and we gave particular attention to any potential storage area that was in the public right-of-way. And then we looked at these larger storage areas, and a lot of them were in a combination of public and private, and a lot of them were in private only. So when we did this higher number or higher tolerance of a 3 foot depth, 100 square feet, we ended up with 58 different areas. And so we use that as a basis of conducting field investigation, just to see what is out there, what potential there would be for detention for public stormwater practices. And this is just half of the sites that we looked at. We had criteria to rank them, to look at how much storage is available versus what kind of runoff in the watershed. And then we conducted our field investigation. So the field investigation included, we had a smartphone app that shows on the left. This is just an example of one of the storage polygons, number 12 off of Kentucky Road. And so we use this app to then do a field investigation and photo document them. This particular one is not in a flowing stream. There was, yeah, it may not be considered a jurisdictional stream, but these were kind of few and far between. The majority of the sites that we found were in jurisdictional streams, like you might expect, either adjacent to or basically, you know, where a roadway was potentially causing a backup. So the findings with these 58 different sites was that most of the storage opportunities, unsurprisingly, are along creeks at road crossings. And it's important to consider that if those are used for any kind of stormwater impoundment, there are ecological and habitat impacts, which can be negative. And then there'd be permitting issues. It can often be difficult to get permits by impounding jurisdictional streams. And it's probably only advised in rare instances where you're having like serious downstream flooding problems. So very few storage areas were in the public right-of-way outside of streams. And wanted to mention that from my discussion with Mike Harrison and his history with the system, that it really functions very well. And that's kind of our observation too, at least in terms of looking at the infrastructure and potential damage, that it seems to be in very good condition overall. The only exception to that is when there might be need for maintenance and leaf litter or debris is clogging part of the system. And then damage obviously has happened during extreme events. But as Mary and I were discussing, you know, for stormwater infrastructure, you don't design it for these extreme tropical storm events. They're like your criteria, it's for the 25-year. So from there, we needed to think about the benefits of finding other opportunities for distributed SCMs. And SCM, it's one of our many acronyms, stands for Stormwater Control Measure. It sort of has replaced BMP, Best Management Practice, as the preferred term, and looking also at private property. So in terms of project opportunities, again, distributed stormwater control measures, we wanted to discuss with you a potential homeowner assistance program, potential project or need along Rainbow Terrace in the parking lot, Lake Susan, Montreat Lodge. And so in terms of distributed SCMs, you've got some good practices at the new town hall. You've got this rain garden with storage area and some rain chains and other practices, landscape based. These are good examples. And I know in your stormwater ordinance, you have a number of practices listed, and I'm just going to maybe list a few others: bioretention, rain gardens, wetlands, permeable pavement, cisterns, rain barrels, bioswales, what we call DIS, or disconnection of impervious surfaces, green roofs, restored riparian buffers, bioinfiltration devices, tree planters, subsurface gravel wetlands filter strips. I'm basically just giving you a kind of a shotgun of all of these different practices that some are well known, some are less known. Terrace bioretention, We've even used mushroom mycelium filters for parking lot runoff. They break down petroleum hydrocarbons. And then they're proprietary systems. And just some photos of.
How much longer do you think you're going to be on this?
Um,
We had a
for
half
that-
an hour put aside.
I'm just about done. Yeah.
What
but-
I'm thinking too is that, are you going to provide this report to us
Yes.
so we can have it to reflect upon?
Yes.
And
I
then
have-
maybe to get back together at our June meeting. You wanted to finish your report in June, is that right?
Yes.
So that we could have either a special meeting to confer with you or do that at our June meeting.
Okay. Would you like, I could probably finish it up in 5 minutes or less. Would that be
Thank you.
sufficient? Okay. So this is just examples of different green infrastructure practices. In an example, this is at the town hall in Mars Hill, a before and after. So you can see sort of there are lots of potentials on steep slopes. And this is one of the projects we did at the town hall, steep slope bioretention, using a terraced approach. And this shows different DIS strategies. When you disconnect impervious surface or downspouts, you can convey them to different types of practices, some of them even on steep slopes. And we're working on a pilot project right now with Riverlink. For homeowners assistance, an example is the Raleigh Rainwater Rewards Program. And it's a successful program. It covers many different practices, and depending on where you are in the city, they'll provide a reimbursement of between 75 and 90%. Lake Susan, to mention briefly, this provides benefit for the Flat Creek watershed in terms of flood storage, and it also captures sediment. Our understanding, it hasn't been dredged at least since 2004, maybe longer. By dredging it, you could have additional flood storage. And then there's potential for lowering the normal pool. And finally, two more. Montreat Lodge. We know this is a major project going in, and it'll just be important to optimize the stormwater management as part of this. And then finally, the Rainbow Terrace and parking lot. This has been a source of sediment and fines that are being released into Flat Creek. We know that some of this is maintained by the DOT, and I guess the parking lot by the town, but there's evidence of active sedimentation being released into Flat Creek. And so it's important to stabilize these surfaces, and then if necessary, install a practice, an SCM that would capture any remaining sediment. And then I'll turn it back to Mary.
Yep, I'll wrap up quickly. Initially we thought we would find some sort of public right-of-way, kind of larger scale project that we could do. And I would look at a 319 grant, which is kind of the follow-up through DEQ typical funding. We've done this in Black Mountain a few times to put in some sort of kind of treatment system that helps manage stormwater, but we didn't really find a location that was good for that. And so we're kind of shifting our focus more to thinking about how to assist homeowners. There is some concern about the requirements for new development, I think, when you were looking through your ordinance. And the costs of the things that people are doing. The question is, in my mind, whether or not a rain vault is really necessary, or if some other practice, some combination of these practices that are less expensive could be equally as effective. And my apologies, the building supply delivery is here now. They were supposed to come yesterday. Another question, of course, if in looking at a homeowner assistance program, I can likely find grant funding to seed that. But there has to be maintained over time. So the question is, does Montreat want to consider a stormwater utility, both to help cover the cost of maintaining and meeting your permit requirements, as well as providing some funding for homeowner assistance. And I did confirm that a stormwater utility fee can be used. It does meet the public purpose requirement in the North Carolina Constitution, because it is, helping manage stormwater, which impacts the entire community. We are having a stormwater utility fee workshop in a week, actually, a week from today, with the UNC Environmental Finance Center. Alex is invited. Scott, I probably need to forward that to you as well, to kind of think through, the benefits of utility versus the costs of it. And we are also seeking funding for a mountain region stormwater management guide that incorporates findings from this and from other projects that have been done in the region. I'm going to hit mute real quick because I know that's annoying. I really apologize. But happy to discuss further, obviously, to share this presentation and to take your feedback as we're developing our final report and final recommendations.
Great, thank you, Mary. Anyone have any quick questions on this? I think it'll be a lot easier when we get it and we can go through it and reflect upon it, and then maybe meet with y'all again so that we can then discuss it all together. And we have had a chance to digest it.
This is Scott.
I just ask one question. Mary, are there stormwater utilities utilized by municipalities in North Carolina?
Yes, there are a number of them. I forget the breakdown between, particularly for MS4 communities. There's some statistics that I don't have in front of me, but Asheville has one. Black Mountain is just starting one. Hendersonville has one. Laurel Park has teamed up with Hendersonville. So Hendersonville collects the stormwater utility fee for Laurel Park and distributes it to them. Fletcher is considering doing the same thing. Woodfin is looking at it. So it's common in certainly in large municipalities like Raleigh and Charlotte. But I think, I wish I had the numbers in front of me. That we'll be talking about that next week, actually. And I was just looking at it, but I can't remember. Not all MS4 permitted communities have a utility, obviously, like yourselves. Montreat does not, and several other of our communities do not right now. But more and more are looking to do this because the state is just, enforcing the permit requirements, which costs you money to do. It's infrastructure, just like your water and sewer are infrastructure. So yeah, the stormwater utility, I think Asheville's is below $2 a month. There's different models. Hendersonville is higher. It's $5. That's high on the high end. But we're going to be talking through kind of different rate models and kind of price ranges and things like that, and considerations when and if you do use a utility next week at this session with the Environmental Finance Center.
Thank you.
A quick question. It seems to me that Lake Susan is the most successful, unfortunately for Lake Susan, in capturing sediment. And so that doesn't go down stream. And it seems to me that the larger capturing element at Rainbow would be maybe the most successful impact as a single project. And then if there were a way to take some of the burden off of Lake Susan by something that intercepted a little bit ahead of Lake Susan, that could also make a huge difference.
Right, and it looks like John, and I'm blanking on his last name right now, from the conference center, we had this idea of a forebay to capture sediment before entering Lake Susan was discussed. And he thinks, he's looking for the old drawings. He said there used to be a swimming hole, a deep section of the creek right before the lake that is now filled in. And he thinks, looking at it, that was man-made. that there is actually already basically a sediment trap or a forebay that has filled in over time and is no longer functioning that way. And so he's actually checking kind of old records that he can find to try to determine if that has already been constructed. To construct it now, to get the permitting required to allow that to happen in the creek, I would be hesitant to say that we could get DEQ and the Army Corps on board with that, because Lake Susan itself is already is performing this function. And John also said that he doesn't think the lake was even dredged in 2004. The levels were lowered to put in a sidewalk and some repair work was done. So he can't find a record of when it was last dredged either. So that is something that we have tried to explore further, the idea of a forebay or a sediment kind of trap right before Lake Susan that would be easier to clean out. And it may already be there and may just be full. and he's trying to look at old drawings. And I'd asked my colleague Scott to see if he could dig up anything as well to help us understand that better. Because if it is already there, then it may be a matter of just doing the maintenance on it to help it function again.
That might be something that the MRA files might have too, in addition to the town. Richard Sills may have that, so maybe Richard DeBose, you can work with the town and maybe provide some of those. Okay. Good.
Well,
Yes,
thank you for your time today, everyone. And we will send out this, we'll provide this presentation to Scott and he can share it with you. And we look forward to, you're welcome to contact myself or Tim with any additional thoughts or concerns before we finalize everything and go before council.
Great. Thank you very much, Mary and Tim. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So Scott, maybe follow up with that. Let's set up a meeting.
Yeah, I've made an initial inquiry at the MRA offices earlier this week, actually, but I can just follow it a little further just to see if there's anything there.
Great. Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions about that? It seemed to me that we probably need to enlarge the group because the council probably, maybe some other groups than planning and zoning. Just think about that. Great. Okay, let's move on to agenda item number 5. The discussion of the continued discussion of the draft zoning ordinance. Scott had made a number of suggestions and observations that we had started considering. I think where we concluded for the most part was that we needed to take these later because we needed to get the zoning ordinance in shape for passage by the town council in time for the July 1st deadline. So Scott's going to lead us through some of this. Dan, I know, has had some comments on this, and just discuss them briefly and then move on into the other section. Scott?
Sure. So there have been a couple of inquiries from the, for lack of a better word, the MRA Lodge project team. It's primarily questions coming from Samsel Architects, and these were really just points that I was trying to follow up on just for clarification. And I made a note on each of these where it was a question on the existing ordinance versus the proposed 2021 ordinance. I've just got a couple of running notes here. There was a question about off-street parking requirements and calculation methodology for a hotel use. In the current ordinance, hotel is not a defined use. There are currently the uses of inn and lodge. And so the general decision right now is to use either of those uses as the basis for any potential hotel or lodging parking calculation. That would be on section 702.2, and that is of course referring to section 700, which is the permitted uses table in the zoning ordinance, the current zoning ordinance. And the permitted uses listed in that are inn and lodge, and those are conditional uses.
That's in the revised.
That is in the current ordinance. The proposed ordinance has, I'd have to quickly reference where the permitted uses table is within that, it simply has, well, I should say it's got the use of hotel in there, and then just as a perhaps a minor typo and bit of cleanup correction, the uses of inn and lodge are listed in there. So just to simplify and correct that, the permitted uses table in the new ordinance would need to remove inn and lodge, as hotel is replacing those.
But there is a 702.2 which deals with parking spaces for bed and breakfast. boarding houses. I'm looking at.
Okay. I will make a note of that in my
If
notes.
if I could respond real quick to something that Scott just said, I agree that we need to clean up that table regard those three terms. But I think, and I don't think we're doing it today, I don't think we're doing that, but just as a thought going forward, everybody often thinks of a lodge as being a rustic hotel, maybe. Here in Montreat, and I think Richard DeBose is here and he can speak for himself. There may be a little distinction there that may or may not be significant in terms of conditional use permits, special use permit, so forth. But a lodge may in fact be very different from a hotel, so we may not want to very quickly jump into assuming they're exactly the same and eliminating one of them and incorporating into the other. We may need to have a discussion about it, is what I'm saying, get some input from the conference center as to whether they like the elimination of lodge or merging it into the term hotel. I think we just need to have a discussion of that going forward at some point.
And
I would agree.
yeah, and because hotels in America, we think of private bathrooms to the hotel room, and lodges were, more rustic, which meant you didn't have all the uses. And so that's where we've been, because it was a religious and it was going to be less expensive to come and be accommodated. So if you change it all to hotel, it sort of is not meeting with what the public thinks of a hotel.
Well, I agree. I mean, you can get into whether it has a dining room, whether it has an on-site manager, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's just a lodge in Montreat may have an entirely different meaning to lodge in general, or the public in general, outside of Montreat. I just think
Correct.
Sure.
we need to have that discussion before we make the quick change.
Yeah, I do think we need to have a discussion on it. I think that would be one of those follow-up things that we do in early July. I think the main thing is to get it to the council.
Right, I agree. And I think the 702.2 covers this first bullet point here about off-street parking.
So I'm just hearing I guess just a kind of a standing item to have a larger discussion on definition of hotel versus lodge. That makes sense. Moving on to the second bullet item, there was a question about minimum off-street bicycle requirements. The current ordinance has a calculation, a methodology formula for calculating both short-term and long-term bicycle parking requirements. Essentially, that's a differentiation of a U-rack right near a door for short-term parking and something like a locker or a bike space within a parking garage is long-term parking. The proposed ordinance makes bicycle parking essentially optional, and that's been the direction that I've been given going forward from the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Any questions about that? So we had discussed this at some length and then decided that we would eliminate that as a requirement. Or we would.
Amen. It's a problem that doesn't exist.
Moving on to bullet number 3, there is, again, this is really just looping back up to bullet 1, just pointing out that in the current draft ordinance, both lodge and inn and hotel are all separately listed. So I think that just goes back to item 1, the discussion of finalizing the definition of uses and terms. Bullet number 4, there was a question about off-street parking within setbacks. Is this allowed? Just looking at within the new ordinance, section 701.4, it's actually 701.4 curbing. It discusses driveways approaching properties. So the assumption is there within the existing ordinance. I believe that's also assumed, at least in that garages are defined as being allowed to be within setbacks under certain circumstances. And certainly driveways, you can park anywhere within a driveway for an individual home. So by extension, you've got a parking lot for a non-residential use. That's the extended logic there, as I understand it.
I would agree.
Yes, yeah.
And lastly, that's the fifth bullet item. The last bullet item, there's been a question about tandem parking. Tandem parking, very simply, is basically parking 2 cars deep, whether you're in a parking garage or in a surface lot. It's typically used in more urban or constrained conditions. Oftentimes, if you're using it, you're going to want to have either valet service between certain hours, or if it's a constant or intense enough use, you would have a 24/7 valet service, or alternately, it's basically kind of an operating agreement between either the tenants or the parking users of those spaces. Essentially, an example I saw, in Boston on a rear alley, there were 2 cars parked too deep. Essentially, that's the agreement between 2 tenants. Hey, make sure you're out of here by 10 a.m. so I can get my car in, vice versa. The question came up again from the MRA Lodge architect team, just exploring parking options potentially for that site, particularly related to the question about a parking garage. But I was really just wanting to be exhaustive, kind of running through either surface or garage parking. The direction that I've gotten in speaking with Bill Shai, the commission chairman, so far is that this particular question will not be addressed by the existing ordinance at this time, and that it should be discussed moving forward.
Agreed. 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 Okay, anything else on Roman numeral 5? Okay, moving on to Roman numeral 6. And I want to say, as Ann who said earlier, that I really enjoyed my conversation with Priscilla. They've been very cordial, and I think people really are trying to work together even where they differ about things. But y'all have been very helpful. And I don't know if Priscilla is on or not. But,
And Bill, could you lean in just a hair closer to the mic?
sorry.
No worries. Thank you.
Okay. So on these responses, these were a result of a telephone conversation or conversations that Priscilla Hayner and I had, and I tried to summarize the questions that the issues that we had discussed from that, and I gave that to Scott, and then he put it on the agenda. I'm going to ask Mason. Mason and Dan are amazing because they're so thorough. But Mason had been a lot of thought about this and had prepared some responses, which we've just gotten. And I'll give that a copy to you, a copy to Wade. But I'm going to ask Mason just to discuss it because it doesn't really need to be in writing. It's just something that we. And Scott, let me give you this too.
I've got a copy. Thank you.
You got one. Okay.
Yep, I'm good. Thank you.
The first question for discussion is what's the process of changing the review/approval authority for special use permits from the Board of Adjustment in a quasi-judicial process to the Board of Commissioners or City Council legislative process? The answer in all this is state law. It's not us. Section 160D and 406A requires a quasi-judicial procedure for all special use permits. You can't change the procedure. It's there. Now, 160D does allow the ordinance to specify either the Board of Adjustment, the Planning and Zoning Commission, or what they call it, Planning Commission, I think in 160D, or the Town Council, the governing board of the local government. Any of those three can be designated to adjudicate quasi-judicial decisions. Typically, municipalities throughout North Carolina and in my experience, which is in Florida, and I think other states, utilize boards of zoning adjustment because they specialize in effect in that kind of procedure. They're used to it. They know the drill. And so that's the way it's done. But regardless of which body, the towns or any municipality specifies in its ordinance, here's a special use permit, that process has to go through the, the quasi judicial procedure. That's just the way it's done.
Let me just say too, that that came up in the context of Priscilla saying that their group had talked with David Owens at the North Carolina Institute of Government, and that he had advised them that in some cases, communities were considering keeping this legislative, and they were amending their ordinance to provide, or they were considering amending the ordinance to provide for a legislative process to the town commission. But we can't determine here that that's correct. The statute doesn't seem to permit that.
The statute doesn't seem to permit it. In the commentary on the statute that the government, that the UNC Institute released seems contrary to that in the discussion. And again, that's not my judgment. From a policy standpoint, that's just, that's just the way I read it, and that's the way they commented on. Question, decisions about variances require, why do variances require 4/5 majority vote? Conditional use.
Go back to number 2.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Oh, how do staff determine when a conditional use permit, special use permit application is complete? Well, the zoning, under the ordinance, the way it's drafted, the zoning administrator makes that determination. The zoning administrator is, and the town is given discretion as to the form, the application form, what's included, and they're given discretion in making the determination as to whether that form, that application form, as and when it's complete. They also, though, have to make a determination as to whether or not, but by implication anyway, that the application and the request set forth in the application is appropriate for the Board of Adjustment to review. In effect, that the Board of Adjustment has jurisdiction for the particular special use request. In other words, if the application asks for a special use that isn't permitted in the ordinance, it's not a complete valid application that would be forwarded to the chairman of the Board of Zoning Adjustment.
That also came from a question from Priscilla as to what determines that an application is complete. The zoning administrator through the form, really that's an administrative decision. I asked Scott to give us a little insight on this. Priscilla was comparing the Buncombe County application with what ours did. So Scott, I asked you to do a little research on that. Were you able to do it?
Sure. So in essence, right now, an application under the existing conditional use permit process has to meet all relevant zoning and development standards. So basically just referencing things like hillside development ordinance, stormwater ordinance, pertinent setbacks, minimum lot size, essentially meeting, all standards within the ordinance. The current application does not detail all those, but it is by inference, certainly, that it's got to meet all relevant zoning and development standards. In terms of moving forward into the special use permit process, which is, again, just roughly parallel with conditional use permit, the terminology is changing. There could be the opportunity to perhaps make that a bit more detailed in terms of the application by having more of a detailed cross-reference to the existing elements within the ordinance. So essentially, the special use permit application would say, see section, Article K in the general ordinances, stormwater, what have you. So it's may just be a matter of modifying the application for a little bit more truth in advertising in terms of here's your checklist of things you need to go through. But in essence, right now, the expectation is that any application, depending on its base zoning district and its location, is going to meet all of the relevant factors within the zoning and development regulations.
So it might be appropriate for us to consider to work with you to make the application more elaborate. And that's something we can work on as time proceeds.
Certainly.
Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Let's wait till we finish and then we'll come back to that.
Okay, decisions about variances require a 4/5 majority vote. Conditional use permits, special use permits only require a simple majority vote. Why? The why is section 160D 406J. It expressly requires that a variance be approved only by 4/5 vote. That's not optional, that's mandatory throughout the state. Likewise, 160D 406I specifies that the majority vote for any other type of quasi-judicial matter is required. So the ordinance as it has been and now is still, those vote requirements are specified by state law.
And I'll make just one additional comment on that. I had actually had spoken with Priscilla Hayner yesterday via phone, and the point that Bill had pointed out to me, and I think it's important to distinguish, is that a variance is a change to something in the zoning and development regulations. So that's the 4/5 supermajority vote on that. That decision, you're making a change. A conditional use permit or special use permit is simply an up or down vote majority, simple majority on whether or not the application is meeting the standards or not, but it's not changing any standards. So just a quick distinction there. Variance, you are varying the standards. That's the supermajority. Special use permit, you are meeting the standards or not. So,
That really came from Dan Dean's analysis when he and I talked about it. Dan really pointed out to me that when you have a variance, you're actually changing, in a sense, changing the zoning. And that's not in the table, but a special use is permitted. The zoning is proper, but the special use still must be permitted by special action. And that was helpful to me.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that and not to become repetitive and elaborate a little bit on what Scott just said. I think that's a concept that sometimes gets lost in the discussion is we have that table of uses and there are actually two. Well, you can back it further and say there are really three things that you can do in Montreat as use of a property. One is in the table of uses, two of them are stated. A permitted use, which are permitted by right, you just have to meet setbacks and so forth and so on. But it's like building a single family residence in an R1 zone, you can do it. You just have to meet certain requirements, of course. Then there's the S or C, which is a special use permit, a conditional use permit. It also is a permitted use, albeit with certain conditions attached to it that you have to jump through some hoops. But it is a permitted use. The variance is not listed, therefore it is not permitted. And so you really, it's an exception to the ordinance itself, to the table of uses. And so to me, it's very logical that it has a higher standard to jump through. It has stricter requirements to meet, and it requires a 4/5 vote. So it all flows very logically to me and makes sense. I think the concept is very, very good.
Thank you. Questions on this point? Okay, Nelson?
All right. Fourth, it was pointed out that the reference in our existing section in the revised draft of the code, most recent to section 311.637 was incorrect and should read 310.637, which has been noted, and we thank them for picking up that error.
And we will change that in what goes to the council. We have a just quick motion on that, use that typographical error.
So move.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Okay, nice.
Okay, and lastly, when and how are environmental issues considered in conditional use permit, special use permit process? Well, environmental issues are considered for all development projects, regardless of whether they're involved in a special use or conditional use permit or not. Therefore, environmental issues are addressed outside of the special use, conditional use process. They're included in the process in the sense that an applicant has to show compliance with all the provisions, standards in the code. And they will have to show compliance with all of the environmental requirements of any development that's approved in Montreat. So it's covered, but The details are covered in a much broader context. It's an entire chapter in the Montreat Code of General Ordinances, Chapter K. Chapter K is actually just as long as the entire zoning code. It's 90 pages long. There's 5 separate chapters. There's Article 1 on flood damage prevention, Article 2 on soil erosion sedimentation, Article 3 on stormwater management, Article 4 on hillside development, Article 5 on trees. All of those requirements have to be complied with, and there has to be a showing that they will be complied with as part of a conditional or special use process, at least in the new ordinance, not in the old one, but in the new ordinance requires a showing of compliance. But they're not part of that ordinance. They're in effect incorporated by reference by a required showing of compliance.
Any questions? Okay. Thank you, Mason, for that work. And thank you all for your consideration. Thank you, Scott, for your work too. What I tried to do was to get out what Priscilla had asked me. I hope they're doing that, even though the answers may not be entirely in agreement with what they would like to see. Ann, would you like to say anything, or does Priscilla want to? Yes. Great.
So specifically on that second question about determining when an application is complete, I was really glad to hear what Scott Adams said about all the things that as the rules would be requiring. Thank you. Be requiring. I'm so glad it's being taken so seriously. But on the statement that it's just an administrative issue of determining whether the application is complete and that's not the Board of Adjustments, that doesn't quite seem to match what the ordinance says. I'm looking right now at the most recent draft, 310.634. 2. It states the Board of Adjustment shall only approve the requested application if it concludes, based upon the information submitted at the hearing, that the application for the permit is complete. So it's stated very clearly that the Board of Adjustment needs to be making a determination that the application is complete, which it seems like to do that, they'll need to have some written in the ordinance basis for what a complete application entails. This seems like a pretty basic foundational thing to have for all the other applications the ordinance requires. It lays out what the application needs. For similar zoning ordinance like Buncombe County or Asheville, when they have conditional use permit or special use permit application requirements, they lay out exactly what the application needs. And sort of from a broader perspective, adhering to like the earlier presentations on this change, I was really impressed that one of the goals that was specified for this change in the ordinance was to make a consistent, reliably applied rule so that if there is a new zoning administrator at some point or the policy is changed, that it's not varying wildly from one special use permit application to the next, and that we have something in the ordinance that just says, okay, it's so important that the application is complete, the Board of Adjustments needs to determine that. Here's what a complete application actually requires. So that's just my reading.
Thank you for that very much. And I think, Scott, that means that you really could come up with developing an application that we could approve. And I don't know whether we have to approve it with the Board of Adjustment. They're the ones considering it. It would seem that the town would need to adopt this formality that the application is, even though it's determined as an administrative. Y'all have any thoughts on that? I think we're supposed to determine our own procedures. Anything else? I think we're supposed to tell I was not supposed to say that we did. There's some conflict with the council telling us how to do our procedures with community with us. I think something. So it might be that would go to both us and the Board of Adjustment since they're the ones considered.
Well,
They're
are you talking about the current ordinance or the new ordinance that goes, we're eliminating?
right.
I think it's a question of, I mean, if an application form is being, formally modified or agreed upon, I think it would be probably just best practice to have it reviewed by both planning and zoning and the Board of
You're talking about
Adjustment.
just the application itself.
Correct, right. just in terms of, hey, does this make sense to the end user?
Well, that gets conflict in your period for responding and approving.
I can,
That runs afoul of the, how many days you have to review the application and make a ruling on it or send it somewhere. In other words, you gotta wait, yeah, you gotta wait, yeah.
We're just talking, wait, about the form of the application. Not that we would approve the application and make a determination whether it's complete. We're just looking at the form of the application itself that would be filled out.
Just to clarify on the complete question of whether an application is complete, my understanding is that the old ordinance that's being replaced had actually even more detail and had some guideline about what a complete application is. It was pretty minimal, but now it seems like there's nothing except there should be a complete application. So that we weren't sure why. I mean, it seemed like we could think of a lot of things that should maybe be even improved, a little more clear about what a complete application is, but I believe at least the old one had some reference to what it would. Our thinking is partly that having some guidance actually written in the ordinance about what a complete application is actually protecting due process. And it's making it, of course, as Brendan said, a lot easier on the Board of Adjustment because they're supposed to follow whatever rules are. And if the rules are vague, just, not defining what a complete application is, it's pretty hard for them to rule on. Well, it looks like it's 50 pages, must be complete. Obviously, the people who are in there is sort of, the jury, which is what the Board of Adjustment is. They want to know what the rules are that we're trying to meet. So the due process question would actually be for both someone applying for a special use permit, that they would want to be able to know what the requirements are and not, oh, I just have to, talk to the zoning administrator and look at the application form, but actually here's what they're going to be. They're not going to change from month to month. There's basically, these are the things that I'm going to have to show for the special use permit. And it would also be, of course, for anyone else affected by a special use, that they would also know what's required when somebody submits a permit. So the sense was that if you allow it to be just whatever an administrator does, it's kind of taking something that should be part of the legal protection that the Board of Adjustment is responsible for, and then moving it into an administrative function, which no detriment to our state zoning administrator, who's really competent, but in case he's not here for the next 50 years, or, technically, like legally, he's not part of the Board of Adjustment. He doesn't have any legal responsibility. He's just, processing and making everything work right. So the Board of Adjustment is going to want to have, when they're in that position, they're going to want to have, what are the guidelines that we're supposed to be looking for to judge whether it's a complete application? And if it's just, well, whatever Scott said it is, I guess that's what we need, but he probably doesn't want that burden on him, well, I'm just going to create this whole thing. So that was our sense that there should be something in there, not every, line and T crossed and I dotted, but some guidance in there that everybody would know what's expected from the applicant to the Board of Adjustment, that it would be sort of built in.
And I'll just make a quick note that we've noted on screen that Priscilla Hayner has her digital hand raised to speak as well.
Right, just a second, Priscilla. I would just respond to that and say, I would think the ordinary person would, if they wanted to do something, they call the zoning administrator and say, what do I need to do? Because they're not going to go down and look at the ordinance. He or she is going to have the application. And they're going to sit down and hopefully the person will get through it. So there's a firm understanding of what completeness really is. I do think that it would be appropriate to have application include to put in the ordinance what this is not quote complete, then you got to go change the zoning ordinance every time you want to add something to completeness or take it away. So it seems to have the forms approved, but not put it in the zoning ordinance itself, because that's anybody else?
I would just simply agree. I think that's the appropriate way to deal with it, Bill, and gives the town appropriate flexibility. You typically do not see applications for various permits specified in the actual rules and regulations governing these permits. They're separate from, but I certainly think it's appropriate to have the application reviewed and approved by both boards. So that's a helpful suggestion at the end of the day.
And Priscilla, do you still have your hand up? I can't tell. If you do, welcome.
Hi. I don't know.
You're audible. Sorry, hold on. Okay, you should be audible now.
Okay, good. Unfortunately, Bill, the last couple of minutes of what you just said, I couldn't hear really anything that you said, unfortunately, because of the mic didn't pick it up. So I apologize because I know you were responding to some of the points Anne or Brendan made, but I'm happy. Perhaps I'll just make a quick comment, and perhaps you could repeat your last comment, just so that we're all on the same page, knowing what's been said. But I mean, I think from what I understand of the current conversation, because some of the mics didn't quite come through well, but I think I caught most of it. If the preference of the Planning and Zoning Commission is to not spell that out in the ordinance, but rather have, you know, as you say, work with Scott to spell out the application form, I think that could be possible as certainly a workable alternative, presuming that then that form and the requirements were relatively set. Because, you know, obviously one wouldn't want that to be shifted, as Anne said, shifting over time somehow. So to make sure, the most clear way to make sure it's set and clear to all is to specify in the ordinance, which, as Brendan said, most municipalities seem to do, sometimes in considerable detail of a couple of pages worth of points. However, if you prefer to leave that to the application form itself, I guess the importance would be for both consistency and clarity for all, to make sure that that's both detailed as to what really, you know, all the things that should be in the application, so that everyone understands the big picture and understands what will be addressed at the hearing, but also that it's consistent over time. So really, I think the principles are what's important to us. And I think all of us, I'm sure in the room, agree on that. And I think the commission, as I hear it, wants to take a different route to get to those principles, which could be workable as well. So just, those are my points. I don't know if I contradicted or agreed with what you just said, Bill, but maybe you could summarize.
Well, you agreed with everything I said, Priscilla.
Okay, good. Very convenient.
What I had said, and I'm sorry, I keep forgetting to lean into the microphone, was that in response to Ann, that in the real world, what's going to happen is somebody that wants to do something with their property is going to go to the zoning administrator. What do I need to do? That person, in 99% of the cases, is not going to pull out the zoning ordinance. He or she's not even going to know where to get it. So Scott, or whoever the administrator is, would sit down with the person with the application, say, here's what you have to do. Here are the things that need to be included, and this is what needs to be complete. And I'll come back to that in just a second. I agree, and I think that both the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Board of Adjustment would be helpful to have both of those groups sign off on the application form. And so I think that's a very good suggestion. I think these kinds of things are what does make it complete. That'd be something that would be talked about. Ultimately, it's the Board of Adjustment's decision. And one thing that would mean is that you don't have to go amend, if it's in the zoning ordinance, then you got to go amend the zoning ordinance with all the procedures that entails in order to just add to or subtract from the meaning of completeness. Whereas if it's administrative, the administrator has some discretion in that, although the basic application has been approved. And I think that's all that I said in response to Ann. Scott has got his hand up. Yep.
Yes, I'm just noting we've got a digital hand raised from Mary Standard.
Mary?
It was difficult to hear, so just leaning into the mic would be helpful. You catch about 80% of the conversation, but 10 to 20% you don't hear. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. I hope that the second time around was better. So we'll try to be better about that. We just need to have a better microphone system here at Town Hall. Any other questions? Comments? I don't think that we need to take any action at this point other than what we've already done. So is there any other business to come before us? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. All opposed? Thank you. And thank you, Ann, and I keep forgetting your name. Thank you for coming. Brendan, okay. And Richard, thank you for being here. And thank all of y'all on the Zoom for being here too. And Priscilla, I hope we dealt with those questions in a way that we end up understanding at least why we did it. And on some things we agreed. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Oh, tonight, the town council will be considering the zoning ordinance. Alex, I think you told me that at 6:30, there's going to be the town forum, which is the usual one. And you've asked some of us to be there just to be prepared to respond if we needed to. Then the council itself is going to take up formally a public hearing on the revised zoning ordinance. And I think you told me that that would be before the consideration of the fountain issue,
That's correct.
which I'm hoping it will be. So, okay. No, I just can't hear
The
with the
Board of
mask.
Commissioners trying to decide tonight about the zoning ordinance, or that's going to be in?
No, they're going to have a special,
So just discuss
it's just a
it
public hearing, and they'll either have a
Got it.
special meeting or a subsequent meeting to
afterwards.
do
Okay,
that.
That's what I heard something about June.
That's right. That's what
Okay,
I'm
okay.
advised.
So this
Right.
is like commentary, questions from the public about it, and then later
Correct.
will be their actual decision. Okay.
That's right. They
Got it.
do not intend, Alex said that's correct. They do
That's
not
correct.
intend, it's not on the agenda to vote.
Okay, that's, I was trying to figure out all the
Right.
moving pieces. Great, thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, Alex, you have your hand up? Okay. Well, thank everybody for being here. It's an interesting committee, and we learn something new every time. The stormwater was important, but also all this. Thank y'all.